Hi everybody, it is Tanya and Carl for our Friday 5 o'clock session on a Friday afternoon. Unfortunately, we had a little scheduling issue this week, so we had to change the time from 4 o'clock to 5 o'clock, and I apologize for any inconvenience. We will be recording this session afterwards, so if anybody has missed it due to the scheduling change, then I apologize for the inconvenience, and you can watch it afterwards. Welcome everybody. Carl and I have been doing Facebook Live sessions for many weeks now about various topics in terms of nurse immigration. Today's topic is the TN, and we're going to discuss that and see how the TN works in terms of registered nurses. For those of you who are joining us today, who have joined us week after week after week, we are very grateful for your support. So thank you for that, and thank you for coming back week after week and sharing your questions with us, and we hope we're making a difference. So we're very grateful for this opportunity, and I'm really grateful to you, Carl, for making the time, because I know how busy you are. And for those of you who are joining us for the first time, I just want to do a 2-minute introduction just to explain what these Facebook Live sessions are all about, why we are doing it, and what the objective is. From a Connetics perspective, we have been in recruitment for many, many years. And we have been working with nurses and placing them at hospitals, acute care settings, nursing homes. Hi, Lorraine, welcome. I know Lorraine, she's one of our nurses. We've placed at one of the nursing homes that we work with in California. We work with facilities all over the US. And for many years now, we have seen a need for nurses to, and for the facilities as well, to learn more about the immigration process. I spoke to Carl. He is an extremely well-known attorney here in California, and I'm going to read off just his bio, his very lengthy bio. Every week I read that off for those of you who haven't watched these Facebook Live sessions, and every week I am duly impressed, Carl. So here goes. So Attorney Carl Shusterman has over 40 years of experience practicing immigration law. He served as a trial attorney for the U.S. Immigration and Naturalization Service from 1976 until 1982, when he entered the private practice of law. He's one of the very limited number of attorneys who've been designated as certified specialists in immigration and naturalization law by the California State Bar. For more than 10 years, he's been voted as one of the best lawyers in America and as a super lawyer by his colleagues at the bar. Carl was featured in the February 2018 issue of Super Lawyers magazine. He has been named as one of the top 15 corporate immigration attorneys in the US by Human Resources Executive magazine. His hard work and dedication to immigration law has earned him the highest rating in legal ability and ethics from the prestigious Martin Hubble Legal Directory, and he's also served as a member of the Immigration and Nationality Law Advisory Commission for the State Bar. He's listed on the International Who's Who of Corporate Immigration Lawyers and the Chamber's USA Guide for Leading Business Attorneys. And that's not all. He has testified as an expert witness on temporary visas and green cards for registered nurses before the Senate Immigration Subcommittee in Washington, D.C. So Carl, as we can see, has a very, very impressive background.
Thank you, Tanya.
And we are really very grateful for your time.
Yeah, I should mention, though, that it's not just about me. We have 8 attorneys in our firm, and we handle hospitals and healthcare providers across the country, bringing them doctors and nurses that are born abroad.
Okay, well, thank you for clarifying that.
Okay.
But that doesn't take away from your
take
resume, Carl. Okay, so the topic today is the TN. We started talking about the TN in last week's session, and we're going to talk about that in a bit more detail. And this week, what we decided to do is actually to have a little bit of a change in the format. And what we're going to be doing is for this whole week, I've been making notes, Carl.
Good. Good.
And all the nurses that we have been working with and have had issues and questions about the TN, I have been taking notes so that we can ask you about various nurses, scenarios, and ask you about real live examples of people who are on the TN and have got questions about it. So before we get to the scenarios and the questions, can you just give us a quick snapshot of what the TN is? I know we covered it last week, but just for those of you who missed it, what the TN is, how it works, and who can work here on the TN.
Sure. So the United States has a treaty with Canada and Mexico. It's called NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, and it provides that professionals from each of those three countries can work in the other countries as long as they're on a list of agreed upon professions. There's something like 63 professions on the list. If you go to our website under visas, you can see all the alphabetical visas from A to U. Right near the end will be the TN visa, and you'll be able, there's a link, so you'll be able to see all the 63 professions. Registered nurses are definitely one of the professions, but I should mention physical therapist, occupational therapist. There's 7 or 8 healthcare professions, and we regularly bring people over to the United States using those visas. Immigration law tends to look at the country where you're born, but for the purposes of the NAFTA agreement, they look at your country of citizenship. So a lot of the Canadian nurses that we've brought over in the last 30 years have been born in the Philippines, in India, China, Jamaica, countries all around the world. And they, despite the fact that they're not born in Canada, the fact that they're Canadian citizens allows them to come to the U.S. on a TN if they have a sponsor, an employer who's going to employ them.
Okay, and I'm pleased that you bring that up about the difference with the country of birth and the citizenship, because I know we did touch on that last week, but this is a question that we get from many nurses, because especially these, I mean, I've been doing this for many years as well. I always say I've earned every gray hair and wrinkle, I think especially after 2008, when there was the retrogression, where the US government essentially ran out of visas, and many nurses who couldn't come to the US at that time from Philippines or India or China or South Korea went to Canada, and many of those nurses are now becoming Canadian citizens. So we get this question almost every day, our team at Connetics, where they're asking, you know, how does my Canadian citizenship impact me being able to work here? And of course, you know, that relates to the TN. And then how does that work in terms of the visa bulletin, which is something that we've spoken about on previous Facebook Live sessions, because that obviously relates to your country of birth. So that is a topic that we have spoke about. We did talk about that in a little bit more detail last week. So if you have questions about the difference, please check out the Facebook Live session that we did last week, and we will be talking more about that as well going forward. So hi to Joy, hi to Mark, hi Lawrence, and Margot joining us. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us, and please feel free to post your questions to Carl if you have anything specific that you want him to answer in this half-hour session. So the first question that I have in terms of the process, right? So this morning we have 2 nurses, Erwin and Maria. They are a married couple.
Okay.
They are originally from the Philippines. They were born in the Philippines. They were not able to come to the US because of retrogression in 2008. They went to Canada. They are now Canadian citizens. We got them a job in Texas.
Okay.
And they are now getting ready to come here on the TN.
Okay.
So talk us through the process. What do Maria and Erwin need to do? And then, just before you get to that, hold your horses, Carl. Before you get to that, I'm going to ask you afterwards, so Maria and Erwin already have a visa screen. So they have already passed the English exam and they have a visa screen. And then I'm going to talk to you afterwards about Tina, who's another nurse that we placed this week at one of our nursing homes in California,
Okay.
and she does not yet have her visa screen.
Okay.
So I just want to make that distinction because I think
Sure.
it's important for people to understand the difference. So Erwin and Maria.
Okay, so I mean, one thing that I'd like to stress is like all through the 80s and early 90s, there were H-1 visas that we were able to bring nurses to the United States on. And in fact, this is what I testified about in front of Congress. I said, we really have a need for a temporary visa for nurses. Unfortunately, though, the Congress let the temporary visa die in the mid-90s. So really, I mean, a few nurses can get H-1Bs, which we've talked about before, but for most nurses, they can't get H-1Bs because the healthcare providers in the U.S. they work for will take an American nurse with a 2-year degree, and you have to prove that a 4-year degree is required for the job to get an H-1B. So that's a problem. But with TNs, it's really easy. The requirements that go into H-1Bs are almost all disappeared. You do not have to have a 4-year college degree to get a TN as a nurse. You do not have to, there's no prevailing wage requirement. There's no posting requirements for the employer. And for Canadians, not for Mexican nurses, but for Canadians, there's no visa requirement. So when we get we could get a TN right at the airport in Canada, and then the nurse comes over to the United States. So it's the fastest possible way of working,
the
quickest
the
way
easiest,
of working,
and the cheapest.
And the cheapest,
yeah.
Yes. So what we usually do is if the nurse has the visa screen, which means that he or she has taken the English exam and passed it, the IELTS, and also has shown their educational requirements to the organization that issues the visa screen, which is the Commission of Graduates of Foreign Nursing Schools, the CGF&S in Philadelphia. It takes them a few weeks, but they'll issue a visa screen certificate once they've looked over your transcripts from your school, wherever you went to nursing school, wherever that was in the world. I mean, you have to be a Canadian citizen, but you don't have to go to nursing school in Canada. Okay.
Oh, so let me just stop you there because that's very important, and I want to just highlight that. And welcome to Glendale, Rolando, Alexander. Welcome to everybody who's joining us. So if you are, and this is a question we also get often, if you were, say, trained in the Philippines, you're an RN in the Philippines, but you are not an RN, say, in Canada, you can still come through on the TN.
Yes.
Okay, so that's important distinction because there's a lot of confusion about that point. And a lot of people don't realize that because you're an RN in your home country that you can actually come through on the TN.
Yeah, interesting. One of my clients, as we were doing the 2-hour drive from LA today, asked that exact question.
All right.
Yes.
Yeah, very common question.
But you do have to take the NCLEX exam so that you're able to get a nursing license in the state, in the United States, where you're going to practice nursing. And you do have to have a job offer from an employer in the United States. And we prepare nurses so that usually they're flying into the U.S. I mean, it is possible to go across a land border, but the CBP, the organization, the Customs and Border Protection that are at the airports in Canada, even though they're at the land borders too, their specialists in TN visas tend to be at the airports. Okay. So if you go on the land border, you're going to run into an officer who might not know much about TN. So what, usually I tell anybody in an international flight, please be at the airport at least an hour before your flight. Okay,
so that's important, everybody. But please make a note of that.
But for TN, 2 hours before.
I was going to say that's for a regular time, a regular flight, but for TN 2 hours.
Right. So if you're at the Vancouver, Toronto, or Montreal airports, the TN Border Patrol person who is going to make the determination whether you can come into the U.S. to work will be right at the airport. So give him or her an hour to look at your paperwork, and you won't be the only one. So and let them determine that. If they determine that you are on a TN, that you're qualified for a TN, then they'll stamp your passport, you'll board the flight, and then you'll be able to work in the U.S. You can work, as long as your employer asks for this amount of time, you can work up to 3 years in the United States, and you can keep renewing your TNs. We have a TN nurse that's on their 12th year that just came to see me about a green card. Yes. So there's really no limit to how long you can be on a TN. But the TN, unlike the H-1B, the TN is a single intent visa. So when you get to the airport, if the officer is going to ask you, are you going to work and then go back to Canada? If you say, no, I'm going to get a green card, you're not going to be allowed to come into the U.S. on a TN. So, you have to be very clear that you are going to come back to Canada. But, eventually a lot of our TN nurses do get sponsored by their employers and do get green cards in the United States.
Okay. So the thing that from what you're saying and from what I've learned over the last few years is people tend to, first of all, they get very nervous when they're crossing over the border to get a TN. And I think the thing that's important to bear in mind is that, yes, of course, it's understandable that somebody's nervous, but really what the officer's trying to do is they're trying to establish, are you a real nurse?
Sure.
I mean, that's what they're looking for. Have you passed the NCLEX? Do you have a visa screen certificate which shows that your education is equivalent to an American nurse? And is this a real job?
Of course.
So essentially, there's nothing sinister or untoward really happening. They're just trying to establish that. So from the nurse's perspective, the advice that we have always heard, and you can maybe give your input on this, Carl, is to be as organized as possible.
Absolutely.
So to have all your documentation together, and if you are working through Connetics, we have a checklist of documents that you need to put together so that when you go up to speak to that officer, you are organized, you're professional, and you don't kind of dump a whole lot of papers on their desk or something like that. So you are organized and that you know how to answer, how to put yourself forward in a way that shows that you're a real nurse, which you are, and that this is a real job, which it is.
Right. And I mean, we always prepare our nurse clients and other clients the day before they're going to cross the border, exactly what questions they're going to be asked, what papers to submit to the officer. And we've really, I mean, it's very, very rare for there to be a problem. But every couple of weeks we see a nurse who either doesn't have an attorney and just prepared herself, or maybe doesn't have an attorney who's done a lot of TNs for nurses. And they'll, I can tell you just recently, they'll come, and especially with this, in the present administration, they're a little tougher on TNs than the past administrations. So if you are with an agency that's going to place you, but they're the ones who are paying you, then it becomes a real problem, because they're going to say, well, they're not really your day-to-day employer. So I encourage anybody who wants to get a TN, you should have a direct hire. If you're going to work for Hospital A, don't do that through an agency that's going to pay you and then move you from hospital to hospital. Pick the place that you're actually going to work, and they're the ones who should write the letter. And our hospital letters are really written by us, and then they put it on their letterhead and sign it. Because there's just little things, and immigration, especially in the last year, has been changing day to day, week to week. And you just don't want to run into any of these troubles when you come to the border. Yeah.
So it's important to be prepared. Just one thing, though, in terms of what you were saying, Carl, about the direct hire or the travel.
Right.
I mean, we are a direct hire company, so we only place people in direct hire positions.
Right.
But in fairness, there are some travel companies that bring Canadian nurses, and I have seen that also work very well. and the nurses will get the TN and will, as long as they are, it's a real job. And it's a company
but there's an issue now. I mean, I'm sure some of them get through, and I probably see the ones that don't get through, right?
Okay.
But the issue is it kind of started with the IT workers from India who had these companies that pay their salary, but then they would give them to Google or Apple or the American companies, but they wouldn't be the direct employer. And a lot of those people have been turned down, and now I'm starting to see that happen with nurses. So we only do direct hires also, just like you do.
Yeah. So if you are employed by a hospital in a direct hire capacity, it's probably it's probably a more straightforward process, let's put it that way. So, it's not to say that you can't get a TN if you're working for a staffing company, but I think what you're saying is that we are tending to see more problems on that side.
Absolutely.
I have personally, I only work on direct hire, so I don't know, but you've obviously seen that. We're getting a question from Cecile, who is asking us about the negotiations with the NAFTA. With the Trump administration. What is your take on that?
Well, so I mean, that's why, one of the reasons immigration's in the news every day and why things are changing every day. And if I could put in it's sort of a plug, but I think it's helpful to the nurses. We do have a newsletter that comes out every month. So, what I'm saying today, there may be a couple things that change in the next month, and in the next year, there might be a few things that change. So, this video might be up for a long time, so you can subscribe for free to our newsletter. Sometimes we even do mid-month newsletters. And then we have a Facebook account, Twitter account, LinkedIn account. So if you would like to follow it on a sort of more a daily basis, just sign up to follow us. And when these changes are made, we post them online.
So it's real-time news.
It is real-time news. So to get back to your question, so the American administration did do some renegotiation of the NAFTA agreement with Mexico and was signed a couple weeks ago. They sort of let Canada out of it, and now we're in a 90-day period that the U.S. and Canada have to come to some kind of agreement about amendments to NAFTA. Now, I don't expect any of these amendments to really affect nurses' ability to work in the U.S., but again, we got to be ready for surprises. Yes. So if that happens, believe me, in the next couple of months, we will put that in our newsletter and on the social media. But right now, nothing's changed for Canadian nurses.
Okay, so Cecile, not to worry at this stage. I mean, we never know what might happen in the future. But at this stage, it's pretty much.
And if you want to come in and be sure that things will be the same, come in the next couple of months before they change anything.
Yeah. But I mean, just from my perspective is, as many of you know, I travel around the country almost every week, seeing hospitals and nursing homes and surgery centers. And I have never, in all the years that I've been doing this, seen as many needs for nurses, ever.
Oh, yeah.
Ever.
I just got a call this morning, and Adventist Health, who I've represented for about 35 years, they're having a conference in Northern California, so they're flying me up to give an immigration presentation to maybe 20, 30 of their hospitals on the coast here. And I got another letter from somebody in Pennsylvania. Tennessee, excuse me. We handle a lot of nurses. It just seems like there's such a shortage that companies that didn't necessarily sponsor a lot of foreign nurses are doing it now, and they would like to get the nurse as quickly as possible. And if you're from a country like the Philippines or really any other country, I mean, it's going to take at least a year to get a green card. They want the nurses, next week. There's only one way to do that. That's TN.
Yeah. Okay. So TN is going to be the quickest. But it definitely, there is a huge need, and I think that it's really just growing right now. And if you look at the stats, I always quote in these Facebook Live sessions from the American Nurse Association that says that there will be a need for 1 million new nursing positions by 2022, which is like literally around the corner. So, Cecile, just in answer to your question, one never knows with these things, but in reality, are just huge, and as nurses are Schedule A, many hospitals are really looking at as another way to not replace American recruitment, but just to supplement what they already do.
Schedule A, by the way, is a Labor Department list of shortage occupations in the United States, and there's only 2 on there: registered nurses, physical therapists.
Yeah. All right. So that is Erwin and Maria.
Okay.
Right. So hopefully by this stage, Erwin and Maria are in. And yes, Mark, we are accepting med-surg nurses. So please send us your resume to recruiters@conneticsusa.com, and we would be happy to help you. And check out our Facebook reviews to see all of our success stories.
Very good.
So let's talk a little bit about Tina. So Tina is one of our nurses. She interviewed at a facility here in California. She is also a Filipino nurse.
Okay.
Went to Canada I think it was just actually after the retrogression, like 2009, 2010. She's now a Canadian citizen, and she's passed the NCLEX. So the facility were happy to interview her, and they know that it's going to take a while for her to get here. But she has not yet passed the IELTS. How does that work with? I know the answer to this question, but I want you to maybe spell it out for everybody, because this is a question that we get very often for the TN.
Yeah, so I mean, they established back in the 90s this visa screen requirement, and part of the requirement is that you have to be fluent in English. So there's various tests you can take. IELTS is a very common one that people take. There are exemptions. You know, if you're a foreign nurse and you get your degree in the US, you don't have to take the IELTS. If you do get your degree in Canada, any province except Quebec, you don't have to take the IELTS. Also, I think it's Australia, New Zealand, and Britain, and the UK. Yeah. But, you know, even if, you know, you're a nurse in Cebu, where my wife is from, or from Manila or something, and every class you took was in English, you have to take and pass the English test.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So for Tina to know that, yes, you can come on the TN visa, and we're excited for you that you got the job here in the US, but you have to pass the IELTS in order to get the visa screen, in order to get the TN. So There's no way around that. And for anyone who's watching, if you have passed the NCLEX and you have not yet passed the IELTS exam, please go ahead and join the Connetics IELTS support group. We have created an IELTS support group for our nurses, and right now, as of this week, I'm very excited to be able to tell everybody we have 1,500 people.
Wow.
1,500 people in a few weeks who have joined the group. And that really just makes me so grateful to all of you for putting your trust in us. But we have partnered with a company who is an IELTS specialist company. They are a UK company called Swoosh. I did a lot of research to try and find them. We spoke to a lot of IELTS companies to try and look for somebody who'd be prepared to do a free IELTS class. So that's the first thing. And they have been posting IELTS pointers and tips. They partner the nurses up with study partners. They have free classes. We have a huge amount of material that we have shared with the nurses, and really very, very exciting stuff with the IELTS support group. So I just wanted to talk about that a little bit if somebody needs the IELTS. Carl, and then I have one other question. Oh. Carl is now pulling his wife, who he wants to say hi.
Kumusta kayo dyan?
Originally from Cebu, right?
From Cebu. Born in Mindanao, raised in Cebu, went to UP in Luzon. So she's like, her name is not Luz V. Minda, it's Sonia, but she could be Luz V. Minda.
Okay. Well, welcome to Sonia. Okay, we're almost out of time, but I have one question. I've got a lot of questions to ask. I've got like a list I'm looking at in front of me. But the one question I want to ask is, we have a nurse, Emma. She's a Canadian nurse. She was trained in Canada, born in Canada actually, and we placed her at a hospital in Montana.
Okay.
About a year ago, and this facility has actually now been sold.
Okay.
So she has to, so she's not sure, how does that affect the TN? Does she have to cross the border again and get a new TN in the new company's name, even though it's still the same company basically where she's working? How does that work, Carl?
Well, you know, luckily Montana has a border with Canada.
Yes, so
that's
it's
very,
not-
very long.
yeah, it's quite close.
So I think I would do that. Just get a letter from the new facility, go over to Canada and see her relatives for the weekend and come back with that letter, and she's fine.
So it would be a pretty simple process.
Right.
Okay, so Emma, you've got that information. So we have a lot of other scenarios that we're looking at. If you a permanent resident, can you get the TN? This is for next week.
Okay.
Can the US citizens work in Canada? What are the designated ports of entry? How long does it take to get the green card for a Canadian? If you get married to a US citizen, how does that impact the TN? Can you get a multiple TN simultaneously? When you finish one TN, how do you renew it? What is a TD visa? How do you get? So we have a lot of questions for you, Carl.
Okay.
So
But we're gonna have to do it in LA though next week. Okay.
So we are going to continue this next week. And talk about the TN and how it relates to RNs. If anybody has specific questions, please make sure to send them to Carl and I, or to post it into the Connetics page. We'd be happy to share that and make sure that you can. I see that I know Joseph as well. He's asking about studying. So Joseph, you'll have to tune in for next week. So we'll add that to the list of questions. There's a lot in terms of the TN that we still need to learn from you, Carl. And with that, I want to thank you for your time.
You're very welcome.
And I apologize again to everybody for it being an hour later, but unfortunately we had unforeseen circumstances. California traffic.
Exactly.
That was a difficulty for Carl in getting here. And next week we will continue with the discussions. Have a great weekend, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.